So when I first started photography, this was 2009, 2010, something like that. I actually started making HDR photographs. I had no idea how to operate a camera. I definitely had no idea how to operate the software or even really what software to use and how to use it. I knew nothing about it. I didn't even know what HDR was. I had just seen some HDR photographs, and after I sort of picked my jaw up off the floor, I kind of decided I'm going to go do that. That's kind of how I got started. And so in those days, HDR was reaching a high level of popularity and it was kind of all the rage. And while there were good uses of HDR, there was a significant amount of like really bad usage of HDR, including mine. To be fair, I'm not like casting judgments here. I'm as guilty as anybody, and probably more so than many people, of creating those cartoonish, over-the-top things that really caused HDR to get a bad reputation. And so maybe around 2012, 2013, maybe 2014, it kind of peaked in popularity, but so much of that cartoonish stuff was going on, it really started dropping. And I actually went the other way, 180 degrees, to where I was just taking the single exposures all the time and got better cameras with higher dynamic range inherent in them and things like that, and just kind of got away from it. But I will say, over the last few years, I've been shooting brackets again. And I'm just going to say it. I love HDR. I just do it differently now than I did it then. And so do a lot of people. And so I've got a bunch of photos here. And you can see this was a morning on my recent trip, Colorado. But you can see I'm just shooting 3 exposure bracket sets. Boom, 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 boom. Just slightly changing things. And I'm creating these HDR photos because in situations like this where the light, this was before sunrise, so it's inherently a little bit darker than normal, and I'm just bracketing images and creating what I consider to be really beautiful images. Now, they're kind of vibrant. I do like my colors, and they're kind of saturated because I do like my colors, but I don't consider them over the top or cartoonish or clownish, whatever term you want to use for kind of that bad HDR. There's no halos, subtle adjustments, just a lot of them, and they add up and they make a really beautiful photo. I'm going to walk through an example of that. I've got these 3 images here, and if you look at the info up here, I shot this at a 3 exposure bracket set at -4, -2, and 0, and that's something that I do a lot, which is I don't center my brackets. I will often start darker and then end up with not so bright of a bright photo. It's just something I like to do. I would check all these different things here, and then I would click merge and go ahead and build that blended HDR, which then drops it into an HDR merge folder here in Luminar Neo, which is where I'm doing my edit today. And that's where I do the majority of my HDR work, simply because I love the HDR merge function. It's built off of their history with Aurora HDR, which is amazing, and including it and building it in as an extension here in Luminar just puts everything in one place, and I get so much great control. So let me pop into the blended image, and I'll show you how I edited this photo to make something I consider really beautiful. Okay, so here is my blended photo, and as you can see, I've got a pretty nice tonal range, way better than I had in any of the single exposures. One of the things about HDR is it's about the light. I think so many people got kind of revved up around the amount of detail and color and all that over-the-top kind of crunchy, crazy HDR look that they kind of forgot, again, including me, lost track of the fact that HDR is about light. It's not about color. And this is a balanced light example of kind of how things can work for you. Now, the first thing I need to do is actually fix these verticals. So let me get a hold of this, and I go to about a 15 or 17 here, 18, that looks pretty good. You can see that just really straightened up the image, which I think helps because you saw how crooked that was. I have now fixed it. I like to hit the J key when I'm editing. You can see great distribution of light. You can tell that by the histogram. There's a lot of stuff in the center. There's nothing really at the very far end of the right. You can see just a tiny bit of highlights there that are blown. And yes, there is quite a bit of stuff in the left side of the histogram, which means it's dark. But a lot of that is trees, and I'm not using HDR to brighten that up. And that's something that I think is a really important step in HDR is you don't have to show every single thing. If you have a little bit of shadow, it looks more natural, which is not what I was doing 10 years ago with HDR, but it is what I do with HDR today. So let me go ahead and make some adjustments here. I'm going to pull these highlights down like a -40 or 41. I ended up going about a 10 or 12 on contrast. The blacks and whites, I'm going to actually take the blacks slightly down. So that's actually creating a little bit more of that darkness. And I'm lifting the whites to about a 12. Having hit that J key, it's giving me that nice visual that says, you know, hey, anything in red, as you probably know, means it's blown out. You need to recover that highlight. And anything in blue is it's totally black. Hey, Jim, that's way too dark. But again, contrast is normal. Contrast is natural. You expect to see contrast. I saw contrast when I was there that morning. This is before the sun had come over those hills. And so I think it's important to leave some of that because that helps create a more natural looking HDR. And that's what I'm going for here. It's vibrant, it's colorful, but I think it looks natural. I will, of course, let you have your own opinion, and feel free to leave an opinion in the comments at the end of the video and tell me if you think, hey, Jim, that looks natural, or hey, Jim, what are you doing, man? I'm open to your feedback as long as you're nice about it. You don't have to agree with me. But as long as you're nice, we're all friends, and that's good. So I did a small temperature and tint adjustment, a small amount of vibrance. I don't do color work in Develop other than a tiny bump in vibrance. And I've done everything I want to do here. I'm going to hit that J key to hide that, and I'm going to go ahead and close that. And if I look at the before and the after, now you can see what that vertical orientation fix did for me. That's a huge thing in Develop, and that's why I use Develop first. If it's a raw file, it's Develop Raw. When you're shooting HDR, even though these were 3 raw files I combined, it builds it into a TIFF. So when you get into the HDR Merge folder and get your photo, it's a blended TIFF that came from 3 raw files. But I definitely shoot raw because more data to work with, and that blended TIFF ends up looking pretty nice. Anyway, that's why it says Develop, not Develop Raw. Before, after, I think that's looking pretty good. Now, I do need to go into Erase. There's a drain pipe over there and a couple of spots. Let me take care of that so I can get those things out of the way, and then we'll move on in this tutorial. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I've cleaned those up a little bit, and I'm going to go into tool number 2, which is Super Contrast, which is pretty much the second tool that I use just about every single time I use Luminar. And that's just because it's all about balancing the light, which is exactly what I'm always trying to do after I do Develop, because I focus on the light first. I've talked about this, and I've put this in my newsletters, which, by the way, if you haven't joined my newsletter, I send it out about once a week, and it's got tips, tricks, ideas, things like that, including workflow tips and ideas, especially here in Luminar. But Super Contrast is a big one. You can join my newsletter at the link below. I don't think I said that, but anyway, there it is before, and there it is now. If you look at the highlights, there they are, a little bit brighter, and now a little bit tamer. It's a slight minor difference, but it's something that I like to do. And then after I do light, I like to come in and play with the detail. And there's not a lot of detail I want to play up here, simply because I want to keep it looking like a dreamy kind of scene. But one thing I do like to do is come in and smooth out the sky and water. And to be fair, they're already pretty smooth. And also, to be fair, the masks with Mask AI are pretty good. It didn't get everything, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go correct that. All you got to do is just grab a brush and just make that adjustment if you want to. I'm going to do about a -25 and just call that a day, just smoothing out the sky and water. And now what I want to do is to stylize this photo is to get into color. So it was light, and then detail, and then color. And that's really my general approach. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to about a 20 here on the saturation and toning for the highlights, leaving the hue at 0. And that's simply because it just adds a nice little bit of that kind of reddish look overall. There it is before, there it is after. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go to landscape and get golden hour. And I'm going to go to about a 24 here. Golden hour is great at sunrises and sunsets because that golden light starts hitting things, and golden hour, as you can see before and after, really starts to pop those things that are kind of already warm, which includes the grasses, the seat in the boat, the clouds in the sky, and their reflections. All that stuff together just works really well with a little touch of golden hour. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go into brilliance and warmth, and brilliance is going to be about an 8 or 9, and warmth I'm actually going slightly left, which is basically cooling it off. And what I'm doing here, just to stop for a second, is there's a lot of blue in the scene, and I'm bringing up some of that blue by cooling it off a little bit, but I'm also going to do something here in a second to kind of pop some of those warm colors, and I did the toning and the golden hour already to kind of pop those warm colors. And so in combination, I'm just taking the warm tones and the cool tones and I'm playing them off of each other to create that color contrast in the image, create a little bit of tension, and warm and cool are complementary, right? Just like yellow and blue are complementary. So I'm trying to play that up a little bit by creating a little bit more tension in the photo through the use of color. And so I'm warming up the stuff that's warm, which is what split color warmth does. And then the stuff that's already cool, I'm cooling it off a little bit more. And you can see some of these warm colors are coming to life, but in doing so, the adjustments I'm making to the cool here and the temperature there are keeping it from becoming too warm overall. And then in color balance, I'm going to do a minor adjustment here of about a 4 on towards the red and about a -7 or 8 toward the magenta. And I mean, I think that color looks great. I'm a little biased because I just made this edit, but if you look at the before and the after, I feel like I've done a good job of balancing kind of the blue or the cooler tones with kind of the orange or the warmer tones to create, I think, a nice balance across the image in terms of the color. So that's what that is all about, is just trying to balance out that colors, trying to achieve that kind of, I hate to use the terms that are built into their tools, but kind of that color harmony or color balance. And yes, you can get amazing colors out of HDR. Just keep in mind, it's about the light, not the color. So you want to be careful. And one thing I talk about in a lot of videos is when you're adjusting color, keep it to like 2 tools or maybe 3 tools and don't do too much. So I did toning, I did golden hour, and then I did color harmony. You could argue, and it depends on whether you like this much color or not, you could argue that I did a little too much. I think it looks nice, but the point is just whenever you are doing it, just move it a little bit on a 2 or 3 tools. Don't use a whole, don't drag it a whole lot in any direction with multiple tools, because you stack these edit upon edit upon edit, and guess what? You end up with a really intense kind of over-the-top shot if you're not careful. Now, when I was there, one of the things I think about HDR is because I kind of did it for so much of my early kind of photography career, photography life, and then I kind of quit for a while, and then I got back into it. I'm always asking other photographers. And when I was up there, I ran into some people I knew, and I also met other folks when I was out shooting. And I can't tell you how many times I heard people firing brackets in medium to lower light situations like this when I was here by myself, which is amazing to have all to myself. But in other situations, sunrises and sunsets, when I was standing next to other photographers, I'm not exaggerating, just about every time I hear that bing, 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 bing. 5 exposure bracket or just bing, 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 right? 3 exposure bracket, which is normally what I shoot. People do this all the time. When I've been in Iceland with other amazing pros, and I ask them, hey, do you ever shoot brackets? Do you shoot HDR? Yeah, sure do. I hear them advising some of our clients on these Luminar photo tours, hey, this is a scene where you probably want to shoot a set of brackets because the difference in light is so big. So it's funny that HDR kind of died, but the truth is it never died. People just quit talking about it as much because it became a little bit of a bad word. People started doing it differently, which is a little bit more subtle implementation and not the crazy over the top color and detail and light distribution where everything is lit up. Here, I like to keep shadow. And then also, people are doing it differently, like exposure blends and things like that. Instead of tone mapping in HDR like I did here, they're using exposure blends. 1 exposure for the foreground, 1 for the sky, blend them together, and then edit that. So I do all these kind of things, and they all work really well. So HDR really just kind of morphed into, instead of I'm an HDR photographer and that's all I do, HDR became another arrow in the quiver. It's just a tool that you can use when it's necessary in lower light situations like this to get a better range of light in your finished image. I'm going Accent AI, 29 is too high. I'm going to do about a 20, 22, something about like that. And I'm going to pop into develop and I'm going to hit J again. And I don't have any really bright highlights, but I want to bring them down still just a little bit, simply because it feels a tiny bit bright in that sky. Somebody like a -20, even though according to the histogram and according to the J key overlay, I wasn't really blowing anything out, but it calms it down just a little bit. There it is before, and there it is now. I think that looks a little bit better. And then honestly, I'm just going to wrap this up with a vignette, and it's just because I kind of like vignettes, I guess. And And hey, it's my photo, might as well do what I want. I like roundness and feathering to about 100 most of the time. And I love inner light, so maybe like a 15. And you can choose the subject. For me, the subject is the boat kind of leading to the reflection of that sunrise across this lake and all that. But having the vignette default to the center of the photo, I think works just fine, even though the boat is kind of anchoring that composition. But this is not dark down there. And so that is my full edit, my friends, before and after, fixing verticals, bringing up colors, managing the distribution of light, enhancing or removing a little bit of detail, just trying to make a balanced image that I can do better with a blended exposure or a blended bracket set with HDR tone mapping, and then massaging those colors to get the look that I want overall, which to me, again, is a color balance or color harmony kind of approach, which is, hey, I want my photo to have a nice blend of warm and cool. And actually, I think I need to straighten this photo a little bit. It looks a little bit crooked. That's pretty common for your friend Jim here. My photos are often crooked. I feel like I need to see a chiropractor at times. But anyway, that is fixed, and the before and the after, massive dramatic difference. Doing a few simple things, manage the light, manage a little bit of color, play around a little bit. But I got here because I was able to get a nice tone mapped image to start with, gave me a beautiful distribution of light, but you recognize broader distribution of light and a less broad distribution of light. In other words, a little bit less shadow, a little bit more visibility into the trees in the distance and even the trees there. But now they're pretty dark, and you can tell by looking at the histogram that they are, but I think that looks natural, and I think that looks normal, and I think that's what you expect to see in a lower light photo. Everything's not bright, and that's a different way of doing HDR than I did and other people did 10 years ago. Lots of people still use it, pros, amateurs, and everything in between. It's a great technique. I'm going to keep using it. And if you'd like to see more videos about different things you can do with HDR, leave me a comment down below. I'll be back soon with more videos. Thanks for watching, my friends. I'll see you soon, and until next time, adios.